delighted to be welcomed by somebody who needs no introduction. The website for the purposes of this conversation is factcheckzuck.com. Headline here out of Fox News: Candace Owens targets Facebook third-party fact-checkers with lawsuit. She says, I decided I was not going to give up and sit down. She is a New York Times best-selling author of the book Blackout, which has just been released recently. Of course, founder of the Blexit movement as well. We'll talk about that later on in the show. Candace, welcome back.
It's good to be back. PJW, first person who ever had me on his show, ever.
It's good to see you again, Candace. Now, I want to get into this, you fighting the fact checkers, because this is something that's happened relatively recently. It's kind of flown under the radar, what with all the election news. You're basically saying it's time to fact check the fact checkers. I want to go on and talk about this development with PolitiFact having to publicly back down. But first, you're taking legal action against USA Today and this group called Lead Stories Fact Checker. Just tell us what prompted this initial lawsuit in the first place.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting story. And basically, I had published an article onto my Facebook page that was written by a guy named Dr. John Lee, who writes for The Spectator. And it was basically him, he's a former NHS pathologist, very strong resume, is a doctor, and can, of course, write his opinion on the COVID-19 sort of scare tactics that we see. And in the article, he basically just did a deep dive on how they were calculating COVID-19 deaths to expose, just sort of the fraudulence behind it. And people were dying and they were doing post-mortem testing for this virus, which they had never done before, which of course was fluffing the numbers. And I published this onto my Facebook page, and it got fact-checked and it got removed by Lead Stories LLC. So I look into Lead Stories LLC, and lo and behold, it turns out that a CNN editor of 26 years in 2015 decided to leave CNN and start Lead Stories LLC, and somehow scored one of the biggest contracts ever with Facebook to become a legal fact checker. His name is Alan Duke. And as soon as I saw this, I went, this is crazy. And I went through the proper means. I contacted Facebook and said, I want this removed from my account. What I said was not false. And he basically wrote an article declaring it was false because he had found another doctor that disagreed. So basically, this was a game of my doctor is better than your doctor, but I'm Lead Stories and I work for Facebook, so I'm going to be able to censor you. And that's pointedly ridiculous. And so I contacted Lead Stories and contacted Facebook and went through the means of their process where you're allowed to say, okay, well, you can appeal it. And of course, he came back and was basically like, I'm a god and I've decided that this is still false, but I'll remove it from false to kind of false. And I just wasn't happy with that. So I decided, you know what, let's put these guys through discovery. Said to my husband, I want to go after them. I want to sue them, and I want to expose who exactly these fact checkers are, and just really understand how they got these contracts, how they got this contract with Facebook. And Facebook immediately distanced themselves from the fact checkers. They wrote my lawyer back a letter and was like, we have nothing to do with these third-party fact checkers. Great. Okay, so if you're saying now that we can just go after the fact checkers one by one and sue them, I'm happy to do that as well. So because he didn't change the false rating, we went after USA Today for another scenario that was similar to that one, which made no sense. It was basically an opinion check. And we hired Todd McMurtry, who represented the Covington Catholic Nick Sandman with some great success. And we are going after the fact checkers, plain and simple.
Now, to make it clear, you've got 4 million followers on Facebook. They demonetized your entire account after this initial fact-checked post. Did you get remonetized, or is it still demonetized? Because we have to make people understand here, according to the Washington Times report, because of your contract with Facebook, which they agreed to, you make around $1 million a month off of your Facebook account. By means of this fact check, it got demonetized. Of course, we know along with that, your entire account gets relegated in the algorithm. They're interfering with your book sales. You've got a new book out. That's again being relegated in the algorithm, people seeing that because of this parasitical fact-checking company, which is not just trying to demean you in terms of your reputation. They're literally stealing content and they're stealing revenue from your Facebook account because it was demonetized as a result of this, correct?
That's exactly right. Because don't forget, when they issue that false rating, they then direct traffic from your page to their site because they say this is why it's false. And usually, what they put up is completely not even addressing what you initially put up. They get around it and say something ridiculous where they go, "Well, this is false because this doctor." This is literally what they wrote on that post. This doctor in Colorado disagrees with Dr. John Lee in the UK. Therefore, we're going to say this is false. And my average post, and this is without being monetized. This is with them shadow banning me. I'll usually get 3 million people looking at each of my Facebook posts. So that directs 3 million people to their site where they have advertisement and they earn money. I mean, it's completely parasitic behavior. And they do this just because they decided they're the fact check gods. And what we really know is that they're not actually checking facts. They're checking against what they deem to be wrongthink, right? And wrongthink is anything that goes against the preferred leftist mainstream narrative. And I mean, you could write something like only women can have birth. Only women can give birth, and you can get fact checked and they can pull that down and they can say, well, we found this guy John Doe out in Utah who disagrees and says men can give birth, and that's enough for them to fact check you and demonetize your page. And to me, it's pointedly ridiculous, and I'm prepared to fight them because I have the platform and the means to do so.
And again, this isn't with the background, of course. You were placed on this hate agent list by Facebook. I think last year that came out, or even the year before, of course. I was banned entirely back in May 2019 because they called me a dangerous individual. Again, I'm still in the process of suing Facebook simply to get information out of them, what they hold on me, which in the UK is the law that you have to have access to that by law. They've delayed that for over a year, citing coronavirus most recently. But we also had, again, these dangerous persons being put on this list. Incredibly, a couple of weeks later, Facebook came out with a fatwa which said it's unacceptable to incite violence against anyone using their platform, except if the person is on their dangerous individuals list. Of course, I was on that list along with people like Laura Loomer, Milo Yiannopoulos, Alex Jones, and others, literally inciting people to organize and commit violence using their service by saying it was okay. And then you made the point earlier about, you go after Facebook and they pass it off and say, oh, it's a third party. We have no relation to them. We're not responsible for their activities. Similar thing with Wikipedia. I don't know if you've found this, Candice, but you've probably been in battles with Wikipedia over the past 4 or 5 years. Recently, some bright spark, some leftist editor at Wikipedia decided to call me a political extremist. And now I'm forever defined as a political extremist. The source for that is, of course, biased far-left news outlets and Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook itself. So once you get defined as this hateful individual by Facebook, which of course is completely biased in its approach to all this, then that suddenly becomes a neutral source. Then that suddenly becomes used by Wikipedia editors. Oh, but you can't sue Wikipedia because that's not an organization, apparently. But then when you try and go and sue the editors, they get protected by Wikipedia if you go after them. So across the board, it's creating this miasma about not knowing who to go after legally, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why we actually wanted Facebook to distance themselves in a letter, which is what they did.
We're talking about fact checking the fact checkers. Of course, a major example of this that I personally experienced back in April 2019, before I was banned on Facebook. So this actually applied to Facebook at the time. And this mirrors what Candice experienced with her Facebook page being demonetized by this fact-checking agency, Lead Stories, placing a hoax alert on their article, which talked about her Facebook post, which was simply a post of a doctor speaking common sense about coronavirus. In my case, it was related to the Notre Dame Cathedral fire in Paris. There was widespread celebrations from a certain demographic, Islamists and Muslims, on Facebook. You could go to RT's Arabic Facebook page, France 24 Arabic. There was a live video stream of Notre Dame Cathedral burning, and you could watch in real time the gleeful responses from these Muslims and Islamists. And you could tell they were Muslims and Islamists because they were speaking Arabic, they had Muslim names, and it was smiley face emoji, excited emoji, clapping emoji. That was their response in droves to the ongoing fire, the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral. So I put out an article about that with the screenshots from the Facebook posts. And BuzzFeed, which is another fact checker that Facebook uses, put out a whole article claiming that this was a hoax. And once again, they slapped a giant hoax alert across the front of their article. And they claimed that we didn't know what these people were celebrating when they were responding gushingly and excitingly with these happy, smiley, excitable emoticons. Now, unfortunately for them, the live video of the Notre Dame Cathedral was at the top of the page in the screenshots that I provided. But BuzzFeed said, oh, we don't know what they were responding to. So they had to change that. Now we have a similar situation here with you, Candace, because aside from your lawsuit against USA Today and this Lead Stories group, you also threatened PolitiFact with legal action over a Facebook post that they erroneously labeled false. What was the nature of that post and what was their response?
You know, I had done a video. Obviously, I've been very vocal. I've been one of the people that have used my platform to talk about all of the irregularities in this election cycle. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, in the mind of millions of Americans and people abroad, that this election was rigged. The numbers just don't make sense. And so once we saw the media just decide on the narrative that that Joe Biden was the president-elect, he legally is not the president-elect. You can't just say that and make that true because you want it to be true. So I did a video discussing how, you know, the media is actually duping people and brainwashing people into believing that he is the president-elect, because if it turns out that he's not and Trump gets a second term, it's going to inspire a civil war. Obviously, when you've been brainwashed by so many media conglomerates to believe that this has already happened and the election is over. And they slapped a warning on that and said that this was false and that Joe Biden was the president-elect. Not only did they slap a warning, they wrote an entire article saying, here is how we at PolitiFact know that Joe Biden is the president-elect, and he's legally not. So it was just a no-brainer. This is just you guys deciding on a narrative that is not true. So we immediately went after them, and I was very keen to go after them because PolitiFact has been so poisonous in doing this and just saying, we decided this and therefore it's true. And I wanted to see, you know, how willing are you to stand by the fact that Joe Biden is president-elect? Are you millions of dollars willing to stand by that fact? Because we are going to add you to this lawsuit that we have against USA Today, that we have against Lead Stories. And they immediately backed down and said it was a mistake. Their lawyer went back and said it was a mistake. I mean, that's quite the mistake, right, PJW? Like you wrote an entire article. This wasn't like, you know, you just kept making that mistake, 1,200 words, kept making a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It was done to continually delude society into believing that this election is over, and that, you know, that Trump has no shot at becoming at remaining the president for the next 4 years. And this is exactly why I started factcheckzuck.com, is to independently go after each one of their fact checkers that are doing just this. They are deluding the minds of brainwashed Americans who cannot separate media brainwashing from real life.
Now, the PolitiFact organization is basically a unit of the Poynter Institute. This is this big umbrella fact-checking network. Interestingly enough, in 2017, the Poynter Institute, which owns PolitiFact, received $1.3 million from the Omidyar Network and the Open Society Foundations, of course, overseen by our favorite Mr. George Soros. And then they came out also, I recall, with this blacklist of conservative websites, which were pretty mainstream websites, the Free Beacon, the Washington Times. They had to withdraw that because of they admitted their own methodology was completely flawed. So these fact-checking groups are more sensitive. And of course, as we know with Snopes, for example, they're all left-wing fronts. This notion that they're neutral, you know, impartial denizens of truth has been disproven time and time again, right? They're all left-wing fronts. And now, in fact, the Facebook officials that were put under so much scrutiny for killing democracy and helping Trump win, half of them are now on the Biden transition team.
It's exactly right. I mean, and it's so ridiculous because, I mean, the bigger problem here is that what we're facing is extreme censorship. And this is something you just would never think would happen, especially in America, where we so much believe in free speech. You are starting to see that they are censoring people. And I think what they did in the beginning and when people didn't speak was they said, oh, we'll just censor the people that are on the fringe, and conservatives got in line and said, okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, we're just censoring Alex Jones and Laura Loomer and Milo, and that's okay because this is polite society. But inevitably, what always happens is that they move in, and there's no such. They're not going after the fringes. They're going after everybody that is conservative. This has always been their plan, and this is why it's important that whether or not you agree with someone or not, whether or not you think Laura Loomer is such an outstanding character that she should have won that congressional seat, or whether you absolutely despise her, you need to speak out and defend her right to free speech. And because otherwise, we end up in a society where now I can't publish the work of an actual doctor because it's not a preferred narrative that these leftists agree with, and they have so much power and control with this tech censorship. It's why they're attacking Parler right now, because people are fleeing, and that's a free market response. And so they're trying to essentially demonize Parler and make it seem like it's being run by people who are racist and white supremacists and all of this crazy stuff. But I know that they are fearful of this lawsuit. I think that they made a dangerous mistake by not just changing when we gave them the opportunity, by going back and changing the rating from false. And I'm planning to take this the entire way, because I do think that our freedoms actually depend on this. If we don't actually score a win against these big tech companies, we aren't going to have a Western society worth defending. We're going to be like communist China.
Now, let's do one more segment when we come back, Candace, but we got about 50 seconds here, so I'll introduce the next topic now. You talked about the vast, oppressive, censorious approach towards COVID, even from whistleblowers experts. The key fact here is the very whistleblowers who raised the alarm bell about COVID-19 at the very start of the pandemic were doctors and medical professionals in China saying that it was a real thing back in December. They received police visits. They were censored on Chinese social media. They were silenced for trying to warn about coronavirus. So the very first acts of censorship in terms of coronavirus were against people trying to alert the world to the fact that China was covering it up. We'll talk about that and more on the other side. We are back. The website is factcheckzuck.com. And Candace has got a real good chance here. If you listen to some of the legal experts, Robert Bonds and others, she's got a real good chance of beating these people. But as we know, they have endless, vast pots of money thanks to the fact that they're funded by groups linked to open society foundations and other leftist front groups like that. Now, you can go and support Candace at factcheckzuck.com. And I invite everyone to do that right now. The link will be in the description when this goes up on YouTube. But I was talking, Candace, before the break. The very whistleblowers who tried to warn the world about COVID when China was trying to cover it up, when the World Health Organization, by the way, said there was no human-to-human transmission, as late as the middle of January, at different times they urged people not to buy face masks, the World Health Organization, that is. Now YouTube says you can't question the World Health Organization. It's this idea that challenging health authorities threatens public health, when the very first people doing that at the start of the pandemic were the Chinese doctor whistleblowers calling the Communist Party out for covering up the pandemic. Surely that's the lifeblood of a free society, right?
Stuff. The COVID-19 stuff I've been talking about for a very long time, because we've never seen such mass censorship over an issue. You would think, and by the way, let's remove COVID-19 from the scenario that we're even talking about. Let's create a new scenario. Let's create any health predicament anybody could possibly have, whether it's cancer, pregnancy. I'm pregnant right now. You are always allowed to hear multiple opinions from doctors, right? I could go to a doctor right now who would tell me that giving birth naturally is the best thing in the entire world. I can go see another doctor who says, take the epidural. In the long run, it's going to be better for your baby if you're a relaxed mom, right? So we've always been in a society that allows for different opinions. COVID-19, we have seen suddenly that you cannot question you cannot question the CDC, and questioning them whatsoever can lead to censorship of even doctors, right? Remember the YouTube videos of doctors who were going and talking about what they were seeing as they were treating patients with COVID-19, doctors that were against the lockdowns, doctors that were saying that vitamin C, mega doses of vitamin C could help cure this. So this entire predicament of COVID-19, no matter which way you look at it, we have a problem. We have a very, very real problem in terms of a free society that is not able to get any truth about this alleged infectious disease that it has been worth shutting down virtually all of Western society. And I say Western society because it's fascinating to consider that it's only the West that has been this locked down for this long. And we're supposed to believe that China, as you just mentioned, we're learning now today, CNN is saying, oh, they covered some deaths. We're supposed to believe that China only took, what was it, a month before they reopened? Was it a couple of weeks before they were able to reopen their society and people were able to get back to work? So I have been talking about this for a very long time, and it is shameful that the media has been participating in censoring so much information from valid sources regarding what sort of a predicament we're actually in.
No, you mentioned China. I've got an article out today. China to enjoy better post-COVID economy than all other major nations. They're out there having pool parties in Wuhan. They're at the nightclubs, no masks, no social distancing. Their GDP this year is set for a 1.8% increase. The US is going to be down 3.7%. Meanwhile, in the US, you've got Amazon adding 427,000 employees between January and October throughout this pandemic. You've got small businesses going bust. They've lost on average 30% of their income over the past 6 months. So the only people benefiting out of this economically are Amazon, Walmart, Target, and all these big retailers who everyone has now become completely dependent upon, as if they weren't dependent on them enough. And China, which went from literally putting out videos of people convulsing and collapsing in the street back in January, which we all freaked out about, that was obviously some kind of propaganda designed to make the West overreact to the COVID pandemic. And now we're in this situation where we can't even talk about it. I want to bring it though to the
I would like to say I was the only one who never freaked out. It was so obviously propaganda when I saw people wiping out in the streets. I'm like, for all you know, somebody passed out. So, I mean, this happens. I lived in, New York City. Stuff happens on the train like this all the time. Now, all of a sudden, you have people, putting together these videos, and you're saying, "Oh, I'm like, so we're all just going to wipe out in the middle of the street." And it always seemed a bit weird to me. Everything about COVID-19 it was one of those things where it just a chill went up my spine. And I was like, something's weird about this. It was also the timing, in the midst of such a serious election in America. Just a lot of it just didn't make sense. Absent any facts, I was going on basically just an inkling that something was really wrong here. But I do want to add one more thing to what you said, which really should let you know how much BS this is. They've shut down small businesses. They have shut down restaurants. They have said that eating in restaurants is just not okay. And yet they have condoned flying on a plane next to each other, okay, where you're allowed to take off your mask, you are allowed to eat, you can drink coffee while you are on the flight, because Harvard did a study and determined that somehow planes are safe and restaurants are not. If that does not let you know that there is a true financial incentive behind this to attack small business owners, and while protecting the elites, then nothing will. And by the way, guys, every time any funding of a study is done through Harvard, you can almost guarantee that they were there to produce the desired results to the person that funded the study. And that is, I think, the most despicable thing that you can point to, that airlines are allowed to fill their flights with people. Everybody gets sick every time you fly because it's just, the air is just so disgusting on all airlines. And yet they are allowed to fly people, and business owners cannot open their restaurants.
No, it's ridiculous. We had a rule at a 10 p.m. curfew where everyone was thrown out of the bars at 10 p.m. They all congregated on the streets and just had street parties. Now in Wales, the government is saying pubs can't serve alcohol, as if you're more susceptible to the virus if you're drinking alcohol. That's going to put those pubs, those restaurants, even further into the mire. And then we have the vaccine, of course. You've had the debate in the US, but it's come to the fore more in the UK, with companies and airlines now suggesting that you won't be allowed to enter a bar, a restaurant, cinema, sports stadium, or any other kind of similar venue if you don't take the vaccine. So we have the government saying, oh, we're not going to make it mandatory, but you're not going to be able to travel or have any kind of social life if you don't take it. So again, it's this two-tier system where you have a lower caste of people who aren't going to be able to enjoy basic freedoms, mobility, and social life. But if you take the shot, then you can. What kind of backlash is it going to create or need or require for these small businesses, these bars, restaurants, to go against the grain and say, no, you don't have to take the vaccine to come into our premises, given that we've seen polls, Candace, in the UK, and it's probably even greater in the US, that show 36% of people are very unlikely to take the vaccine. So bars, restaurants, sports stadiums really going to take that financial hit to carry through this compulsory vaccine policy, or do you see that falling by the wayside?
I see it falling by the wayside. And I will say this, I have already spoken out and said I will not be taking the vaccine. I've been saying this since February. I knew this was coming. It makes no sense. There's a 99% chance that you're going to survive if you get COVID-19. Why the hell would you take a vaccine that has 94% effective and causes you to be sick? And now they're prepping people. Oh, well, the vaccine could make you sick, but make sure you come back and get the second dose. I won't be taking it. But I do want to say, as a reminder to everybody who's watching, if there's one thing that every society in the entire world that has had slaves has had in common. What does every society in the entire world that has had slaves had in common? And the answer is that there was always more slaves than there were masters. I keep that in my mind when I go through and I think about things. There's always going to be more of us than them. If we say no, it's a no. If we decide that, okay, you say that I can't fly unless I get this vaccine, let's just not fly for a year. Eventually, they're going to have to come to because it's going to hurt them. I think every person should do their best with the information that they have available. The vaccine is not for Candace Owens. The vaccine will not be taken in my family, and it won't be given to my children. And that's the most that I can say about that.
Okay, Candace, that's a good place to close. The website is factcheckzuck.com. We'll be sure to have you back on in the near future to see how your campaign to fight the fact checkers is going. Candace, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.